Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Reynolds with Terracon, and you're joining the Writing to Win session. We're on the last day of the 2020 Roads and Streets Conference. I hope you've all been able to network a bit and take something away with this unique conference that we've had. This morning, we're being joined by Barbara Shuck, and she's going to share some insights on written communication, persuasion, and the art of influencing to win more work. Barbara has more than 25 years of experience in the ACEC industry. She has an undergraduate degree in communication arts and French, and then topping that with a master's degree in international business with an emphasis in marketing. She has considerable expertise in marketing research and planning, business development, proposals, promotions, and management. She's also a Story Brand certified guide that helps her with helping others with internal communication initiatives and external efforts that win work through compelling and persuasive stories. So I'm going to let Barbara take it over and give us some insight. Barbara?
Great. Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it. Well, hello, everybody. It's good to be here. And let's kind of dig in with the first question. Here is, don't you know, we rehearsed this, and I can't get the slide to move. There we go. So let's use the chat today to try to kind of replace that in-person experience from a conference. And so when you've got a question, or if you've got comments, or a, hey, this was a great light bulb moment, just go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on it while we're talking today, so that we have that, you can reach out to me and I can kind of reach back to you. So using the chat, what is your biggest writing challenge? What are your struggles? What works? What keeps you from hitting the ground running with your writing skills and the kind of work that you're doing? So like I said, just put a word or two into the chat and we can kind of figure out where everybody is and start with, what are your biggest challenges when you're writing? So we're trying to get it engaging, and here's your chance. I'm pretty sure we'll be able to touch on most of the challenges that you have today. And I'm not seeing anything, so let me just kind of keep going. What I find with a lot of folks who are on the technical side, if you're an engineer or a contractor, hitting that blank page. You just don't know where to start. You don't know, it's hard to get started. It's hard to find the time, and it's hard to see that blank page and really want to move into something that is, going to be the very best thing. Another challenge that I think folks have is that they feel like they have to write perfectly the first time. That if they don't have that perfect sentence all well constructed, then they'll go back and they'll just really work on that one sentence, and they really won't get through the whole component of what it is that we're talking about. Now, we're talking about writing. It could be an email, it could be part of a proposal, it could be a letter, it could be a memo to someone. Lots of different writing challenges everybody does every day, and at the same time, there are still the same kinds of problems. So totally get it. It's not the easiest thing to do, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So as Chuck mentioned, I've been in this industry for a long time, over 25 years, in the engineering, construction management, and the architectural side, and even as a consultant, I see lots and lots of different people across companies from the standpoint of whether they're marketing people, or whether they're technical people, or whether they're CEOs. And there even could be some agency people who are listening in today, and even the people on the agencies. You guys write emails, you write RFPs, you write all different kinds of messages as well. So there's all different kinds of people who are in the industry that I've had a chance to touch on, and I'm starting to see some of those challenges that you run into. So I'll kind of keep listening into those. The other thing is that I'm a word nerd. Ever since I was in 3rd grade, I've always wanted to be a writer, and it's taken kind of a curvy path to figure out, how do I do that? What kind of a career do I pursue to be in the writing business? And I gotta say, in our industry, in the design and construction industry, we do a lot of writing. We do a lot of communicating, and that is kind of prior to getting the work and then after we get the work. So that's what my experience is, and love to be able to share some of these insights that I've learned and seen over the years. So today we're going to be talking about why should we even be writing? Why are we even talking about this? And it's really to win work, to win ideas, to get through to other people, to get our persuasion ideas believable and understood, and to make sure that everybody understands that we're part of a conversation. So I do have some writing tips and tricks, and it's not the grammar police, but they are things that we do every day that I think will really help no matter where you are in the industry. And then I have this magical bonus called narrative mapping, and it really helps us be able to organize what it is that we're going to be talking about. So I know what I see is some of the challenges are engaging the reader with technical content, and boy, we'll talk about that. And then, the writer's block, finding words. And so some of the useful tools that I'll have today will be things that you can email me for, and I'll be glad to share so that you have literally some tools in your own toolbox. And navigation. Here we go. There's a little bit of a delay. Here we go. So what kind of writing wins? And I do want to lean into the fact that we're kind of talking about technical writing in a lot of instances, because ours is a pretty complex business. So even technical writing, and this isn't necessarily going to apply to reports and those technical documents, which a lot of us are accustomed to writing on a regular basis. That's what we may have had that training for. But this is good writing that wins is going to be strategic, persuasive, and clear. So there's a lot of reasons why good technical writing doesn't necessarily fit into a strategy. It's kind of, this is what they've asked for, this is what I'm going to give them. Good technical writing may not be persuasive. It's really kind of, here are the facts, and you may come up with some recommendations at the end of the day, but it isn't intended to necessarily persuade versus recommend something. There's a fine line there. And then the third thing that I see with technical writing is that it isn't always clear. You're generally writing to a very informed audience about technical things. And I know in our industry, the language that we use, the terminology, the big long words, the abbreviations, and all those kinds of things, they're not always the clearest. So we're going to work through all of these aspects so that we can make sure that we're going to be writing strong writing, and the outcome is going to be strategic, persuasive, and clear. So what does it take to win to have a persuasive piece? A winning proposal, an email that converts, email that converts someone to coming to your side of an opinion, or just to make sure that they're doing what you want them to do. One of the things that I believe is that if you tell people what you want them to do, they're likely to do it. They just need to have a plan. So the first thing is strategy. And so when we're looking at, for the most part, let's talk about proposals. What we need to understand is, what does any qualified firm need to prove to win the work? What is required? What are the stakes to be even considered for the work? But what do you need to prove about your knowledge and your expertise so that you would be able to win the work? Then the next thing is, what does our team, what our company does, what do we need to prove to beat each one of the competitors? And I know that I've worked in firms before where they said, oh, we know who our competitors are, and we're a shoe-in for this project, and we've been working with this client for years. At the same time, you always have to think about what is it that you're communicating as it relates to the competition, because clients have choices. Everybody has a choice between your idea and someone else's. So this is when we start to have this competitive comparison and understanding. We'll talk about this in Persuasion, why us and why not them. And then the third point about strategy is what differentiates the team from the competition. What can you give the reader or the person who's on the other end of your communication? What can you help them understand to show that you're different? And what I find in this industry is that we all look the same to clients, that we all are saying the same kinds of things, and it's very hard to tell us apart. So we'll talk about what does that look like. So when we're talking about strategy, we need a simple plan. How are we going to let them know what we have, what it takes? Here's what we need to do to beat the competition. And these are settled strategies. And then we also, what differentiates our team? So we start thinking about who is the audience? What is it that they want? What is our message? How are we going to convey it? And then how can we prove it? So let's break this down into some pieces. So first of all, who is the audience? And I kind of have this spectrum set up because it's kind of like, well, do they even know who we are versus they've worked with us for quite a long time. So these are some at the low end when they, you know, of information that you want to know at one end of the spectrum. Do they know your company or do they not know your company? They've never heard of you and they don't know your staff. They understand the construction process, what it is, or the planning, or whatever this end product is going to be, or they don't understand it. They've never done it. And we find that on a lot of selection panels that we may have people who have never done a project before. Is the budget reasonable, or is it, there's no way this project can be done in this time? That fits into how we're going to approach the project and how we're going to communicate about it. Is the schedule reasonable? What is the personality of the reader? And while we don't know all of these details necessarily, we can start to make some assumptions because of our experience working with these kinds of projects before. So we really just need to understand who is our audience, what do we know about them, and how does that impact how we're going to continue to communicate with them. I finally found an example in an RFP when we are trying to understand what is it that they want. And I thought this was a fantastic example of a client being very clear as a part of an RFP of what they're looking for. And here they give us some criteria about example projects, you know, older versus newer, private versus public, non-school versus school. And so this is really a great filtering process for you to understand what is it that they're looking for and how is it that you can go through your own project expertise and start filtering out what is relevant to your client in your client's mind. Relevancy is always up to the audience to determine what it is, but a lot of times we just think, well, here's a list of our projects, we'll leave it up to you to figure out what's relevant. So we've got some ways that we'll convey that, but what we really would need to lean into is what does a client care about? In a lot of proposals, they're not going to tell you. This is when your business development and your intelligence and your knowledge about the client is going to help inform that. So we need to, if we don't know exactly for a particular person on a selection panel what it is that they're looking for, then we can start to make, excuse me, we can make assumptions and guesses from the standpoint of our knowledge about the client. So when we see this little icon up in the window that looks like a little document, what I've got at the end of the presentation is a handout that's going to have these documents that are in there so that you can email requests to me and I'll be glad to send you all of these examples so that it kind of primes your juices and helps you to get into the minds of your clients and these other tools that we'll have. So what does a client care about? Here's some hot buttons: schedule, budget, seasons, the public input, the perception of the project, what's the risk. All of these things can start to inform what they care about a project. So this is when you start to filter your responses through what's important to them. So these are very important tools. So here's a writing tool that I've got available. So that kind of takes this process and helps you to start thinking about how are you going to capture that information, and then at the very end of the day, how are you going to prove it? So who is the audience? You may put down the individual people who are on the selection panel or who your readers are, or you may be able to put the titles of people if you don't know the exact names. What do they care about? What are their issues? What are their challenges? What is our message? What are we going to say about it? How are we going to convey it? And how are we going to prove it? Which is going to be very essential in terms of differentiating ourselves. So this is one of those tools that we'll talk about. So how are we going to convey our response to the questions? How are we going to answer their questions to make sure that they understand, that we understand what it is that they're looking for? So there's different storyboarding processes, but what I like to think about is, here's one way of detailing who is the audience from an individual point of view. What is their issue? What is the message that we want to convey? What is their response? How are we going to, the details of what that response may look like, and how can we show that we've done it before? So the more you dissect these questions into a spreadsheet, a worksheet, a conversation, and really think into them, then your writing is going to be more focused and directed because you're talking about what's important to them and you're answering all the questions at the same time. Another tool would be to storyboard the proposal itself, and you can break it out into how many pages are in the proposal, what are the requirements that the RFP is asking for, how much are you going to allocate in terms of space to those questions, and then where are you going to be weaving through there some of the important points, the proofs, and making sure that you're addressing those issues. So these are planning tools that help you make sure that you're answering all the questions, but more than that, you're answering the strategy, going back to what is it going to take for anybody to win? How are you going to beat each one of your competitors? And what is it that you can say that's going to differentiate your firm? So the second component that we talked about after the strategy is the persuasion part. And persuasion is really looking at why us, why not them, and so what? And so we know that in any kind of particular proposal, interview, any kind of communication strategy, we're going to have a strength. We're going to have some thoughts. We're going to have a position. We're going to have skills and abilities and things like that. Our competition or somebody else is going to have a weakness. And it's going to be something that we know about or something that we can assume if we know that we're an expert in a particular field that other companies aren't as, don't have that resume or that portfolio. Most important is, again, where is that client's need? So when we see the intersection of these three areas, our strength, the competitor weakness, and a client's need, it's called the sweet spot. That's where we shine. That's where we can focus on our strengths. And that's where we can do some strategies that highlight our strength and then goes to competitor weakness. Now, I never want to be accused of being unethical, but there are ways that you can bring in a competitor weakness, not necessarily naming the company name or individuals, but we can talk about that we have the only project that this has been done on, or we're the first company to have gone through this innovative process. What those kinds of statements are doing are ghosting the competitor weakness. And this is all crafting this message about why us. And then the other part of the opposite of that is why not them. So this is when we have a weakness, the competitor has a strength. They have something that we don't have. And again, it's that same client need. So that intersection of those circles is a sour spot. It is where we definitely have a vulnerability. And going back to the strategy, what do we need to do to beat each one of the competitors? It's like, okay, what are we going to do with that? So we need to mitigate a weakness. We need to acknowledge it or just make a statement. If it's a requirement in the proposal, we have an office in Phoenix, and if you know the client is in Mesa, then this is going to be a situation where we just say, we're going to answer the questions and not go into any kind of depth or highlight or anything about what could be a weakness in the client's mind. And then we also want to neutralize a competitor strength. So this is where your strategy might be to team on a project, or it may be to bring in a subject matter expert, or if you have multiple offices in your company and you do have someone else who may be not in Arizona, but they're going to be maybe in New York, you could bring in the subject matter expert to enhance or to augment the team so that you can neutralize what that competitor's strength is so that it doesn't look like it's a huge weakness on your part. So it's all about why us, why not them, and what is that, how are you going to take that information and start crafting the story and weaving these facts through so that it makes a difference. And finally, we answer the so what. And that is meaning that it needs to matter to the client. And in all communication strategy, I know that a lot of times we think we have a lot to say and that we're the experts in a field and we're really knowledgeable and we're really, we've got tremendous experience in this area. And that's great, it's admirable and it's great authority, but it really doesn't matter if the client doesn't care about it. So we always want to be thinking about everything that we're saying and that in a proposal or even in an email, it's all about the benefits. What is the outcome that the client is looking for or your reader is looking for? What does success look like? And so when we think about the fact that it's from the other side of us, then we start putting ourselves in our client's shoes and we start to create relationship, we start to build trust with them. And this is a writing technique so that we can have a favorable perception in their eyes. At the same time, it's all about competition. We have to make sure that we're standing out compared to someone else, that we're more skilled, more experienced, more have more positive points on our scorecard, so to speak, because we want to make sure that we win, because there is a choice and a decision that has to be made, and we want them to be in our favor. So the third component then is that clarity in terms of what it takes to win. So it has to be clear, responsive, and compliant. So in all writing, there's going to be rules. There's going to be expectations, limitations, frameworks. Here are the questions we want you to answer. And so we know that we have to answer everything, even when we're trying to persuade to have someone come to a particular, to choose us, to work with us, or our point of view on something. It has to be compliant with whatever the requirements are. It has to be readable. This is where technical writing, we want to turn this dry, boring text into something that is a lot more appealing to read and more enjoyable to read. Good writing has to be logical and credible. It has to be well written. It has to be organized. It has to be, the grammar chief police do have to be in charge, and it has to come with a sense of authority, especially in our complex business. And then everything that you write has to kind of win over in each of those component parts. Maybe it's a paragraph, maybe it's a section of a proposal, or maybe it's even in a paragraph in an email. Everything has to kind of fit together and be packaged very well together. I want to take a break here. I've got a question. How do we construct a request for qualification that help the consultants provide a concise response? That's a great question from an agency person, I think. And part of it is to understand that when going back to these rules, when we have a proposal RFP that has a very limited number of pages, and then what you're asking for is a question that has 10 or 15 component parts. It's like, okay, well, we have to answer all of the questions in an RFP. And if you have 25 questions and you have a 5-page proposal page limit, then how can we manage that space? And so what I would say is think about it from your audience's other side. If we're asking them all these questions, are these questions important for us to make a decision on? Are we really asking them questions that matter? And so you can kind of run it through from the consultant side. If I give you my address, does that matter? How does that help you make a better decision? And I realize at the same time you have regulations that you're complying with, and you have history, and that's the way we've always done it. But just think about it, that you're going to get clear questions when you give them the space and the time and the ability to also have literally the space to be able to answer everything that you're asking for. So that's a great question, and perhaps we can talk about that offline down the road. I might be able to give you some ideas. So let's dig into some of these writing tricks. Thanks for the question, and we'll continue to try to take a break when we've got some. So first of all, like I said, it's always about your audience. Understand who your reader is. Understand the reader's time and what they're juggling. And so when you have a proposal that's a statement of qualifications where you've got 25 pages to fill, understand that on a SOQ or an on-call, our readers, our clients may get 50 proposals, and they've got to go through all those proposals to pick maybe 2 or 3 firms for a particular component of work or a short list. And so we think about, okay, what am I going to put in that 25 pages, because they're not going to be able to read every word. How can I help them skim and scan and get the essence of what it is that we're providing, when we realize that they don't have 3 hours to spend on reading a proposal? So how can we help the reader navigate through that, considering the fact that they've got time and attention and lots of other things that they're juggling? We need to tailor our messages. That's where we start with boilerplate, existing content that we've written for other kinds of things, and then we start tailoring it so that matters to what that client is looking for. Then they can feel that we're really connecting with them. Make key points clear. Use numbers. When you've got, here are 3 ideas for the project success, then use numbers, don't use bullets. Make those numbers big, make them stand out, realizing that people will skim, they'll look at headlines, they'll look at pull quotes, they'll use that white space to give their eyes a breather, and we can guide them through with color and font and capital letters and arrows and diagrams so that they will get the information, considering the fact that they've got a lot going on. And the more we can be clear, the less unnecessary details we'll be including. So I have this awful paragraph. It was actually in a proposal. And what I want to be able to show is nobody really wants to read it. There's a whole bunch of words here and it's boring. With the rapid development and large variation and projected water, blah, 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 blah. And it just becomes kind of the Charlie Brown sound, even when you're reading it. So think about how can we break that up? We're going to break it up into shorter sentences that adds white space. And we're going to talk about the problem. And we're going to use bold to make sure that it stands out. We talk about this project in detail. No one wants interrupted service and construction delays. The second paragraph is our strong statement, why they should select us. This is a benefit. And then we have unparalleled knowledge of these components. We want to break our good writing into problem, solution, result. That adds the clarity, that makes it easy to read, that takes out unnecessary details, and it makes it so that the reader doesn't have to wade through a whole paragraph trying to figure out what it is that we're trying to say. So problem, solution, result is a great formula to think about. Be relentlessly clear. Think about it from the reader's perspective. It isn't so much what we need to say, it's all about what they need to read so that they can understand what our position is. Keep language simple and tell the why and the how. So I know a lot of technical writing, what you've learned probably if you're an engineer or contractor is this inductive way of writing. A plus B plus C equals D. It's very chronological, it's very organized. The thing about that is that if a reader doesn't agree with point A or point B, they're never going to get to D. Their brain's going to stop. They're going to say, you lost me, I don't get it. Well, we tend to do this in a long paragraph. First this, then this, then this, and they get lost and they get bored and they get tired. So we apply a journalism, the inverted triangle with the most important information at the top, and you go down into less important information. And we call that the deductive writing process, where you start with your conclusion, you start with your key statement, you start with the result that you're trying to get, and then you provide supporting information. D equals A plus B plus C. What happens is that you're planting the seed for what success looks like, and then you're validating it with the facts. They can hit A, yep, I agree with that. They may hit point B, they may disagree with that, but they already know where you're telling them to go. They already know what you want them to do. And so they're likely to either keep reading or you've at least planted that seed in their mind so that they will believe what you want them to believe. And if it is a chronological or if it's a point by point kind of a thing, they already know what your path looks like. So this is a great way to turn boring text, the inductive, into deductive so that the best stuff starts at the top of a paragraph, at their opening of an email. This is what a subject line does on an email. Gives them the best important, the best information, the most important information first so that they'll continue to read. Give them a reason to continue reading. So this is number 3. This is called the Kincaid Readability. It's a utility in Word, and I've got the instructions there on how to find it. But what it does is that you can take a paragraph or a paper or something and you can run it through the Kincaid Readability study. And what it does is that it gives you a score that indicates how easy is it to understand. So the higher the score, the lower the grade. And I know that I worked with a fellow once that I just couldn't understand what he was trying to convey. And it turns out that he was writing at like a college graduate level because he thought that made him sound smarter. And in all reality, good journalism is going to be at the 5th grade, maybe the 8th grade level. Good writing in a proposal, even for a technical project approach, you want to get it in the higher numbers so that it has a lower grade level so that anybody can understand it. So as an example here, I've got this availability, this paragraph that I ran through Kincaid, and we can see that the reading ease is 43.5 and the grade level is 11. All of this is built on the number of letters in a word, the number of words in a sentence, the number of sentences in a paragraph. And so it's a formula that helps you to understand what is working in better communication. So when we rewrote the paragraph and I cut down on it and changed the words, then it dropped, the reading ease went up and the grade level dropped. So what this is saying is that use simpler words, use shorter sentences, and make sure that it is, you can break paragraphs so that the paragraphs aren't even as long. So tip number 4 is waste no words. And I think in a lot of our writing, we think it's going to be better the more complicated it is, the longer the sentences are, and it's just not true. Shorter words work better. So here are some examples of things to be able to change that are kind of easy to apply, but again, I know you'll need reminders. But instead of the ion at the end of a word, use an action verb. Use the action form of that verb. Instead of is, are, was, and were, make it just, again, that action verb, and then eliminate the padding. I see this all the time, is we believe that, is our opinion at. Take those words out. The whole paper is your opinion. The whole proposal is your approach. Take those things out and it stands alone, and it stands much stronger. So here's an example. Again, that first paragraph was something that I saw in a proposal, took all of that, changed it to the 32 words on the right-hand side, and that's going to be much easier to read. I love the example on the other one showing this. The greatest number of these problems can be readily dealt with in such a way as to bring about satisfactory solutions. We see these kinds of statements in a lot of company communications, in a lot of emails. Most of these problems can be readily solved. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it clear. Let's look at how can we trim and cut the words that we use, as well as the complexity of the statements that we're trying to make. So again, in the handout, I've got a list of simple words. They're kind of, don't do this, yes, do that. And it's not trying to dumb down what your content is. It is simply trying to make it so that it's more readable. There's also the action verbs. There's also, I just want to make this available, none of the things that I'm trying to suggest would be contrary to legal traps. So we've got the fact that I've got that as an example as well in the handout. So I want to take a bonus. This is a really fascinating statistic. 65% of the population learns visually. We remember only 10% of what we hear, 30% of what we read, and 80% though of what we see. So people prefer seeing over reading. So think about, what does that look like in your pieces, in your proposals, and in everything that you're doing. How can you activate that and make it so that it is more interesting to look at as well as to read? And again, shortening it, adding white space, using graphics will make it so that people will see the information as well as read it. So I just want to go through these 2 tips on narratives. Here we talk about the why, which would be kind of like a project approach. Talk about the background. What is the relevance? What is the key information that you need to consider? And then what is the payoff? And when you use this kind of a narrative to deconstruct what is it you're trying to say, then you can reconstruct it, then it will be much easier to understand. And then we talk about the how. What is the focal point? What is the client's concerns? What are the challenges that you're going to face? What are the opportunities? What are alternatives? What is your approach? And I say 3 to 4 key steps. People can remember of 3 things, maybe 4, but what you want someone to finish or to react to after you've read something is you want someone to remember what you've said. And so when you have fewer number of steps, fewer numbers of here's what we need to do, then it's more likely to be memorable, which means that it will have more impact. And what is the payoff? What is the success that they'll see? So again, in the handout, I've got these kind of deconstructing in a letter with people, the resumes, what about projects, understanding approach, and then just miscellaneous information about proposals. I've kind of just compiled a whole bunch of ideas that talk about how can we make something more readable, more compelling, more clear, so that you will get someone to have a better opinion about what your position is in a particular piece of writing. Remember that fewer words lead to greater clarity. Clear writing is not confusing. And then writing is about rewriting. So when you hit that blank page and you just got to get started, just start writing words down. Use the outline approach. Go to those narrative maps. Think about these buckets of what is it that we need to lead the reader through. And then realize that you have to set it down, then come back to it and rewrite it and edit it. And good writing is always going to be about rewriting and editing and polishing. So I know we don't have a lot more time, but and we're not there in person, and Chuck's going to remind me that I'll be in the room to have one-on-one conversations, but I also want to leave that open as well. I'm plenty willing to have a complimentary review of a proposal, an email, or if you're an agency, glad to have some conversation about how can you help simplify the requirements that firms are working with. And so we can have a team call, we can have a one-on-one. Here's my email address, and I'm glad to schedule a time to kind of for additional conversation. So with a few minutes left, are there any questions that you have? And again, here's while we're sitting here, to get a copy of this handout as well as those the handout, the examples that I have in the presentation, as well as these slides, if that helps you, email me at it and I'll be glad to send you a copy of it. So are there any other questions that we might have in the sessions? Are your handouts readily available? Where can we find them? I might need some help from the folks facilitating this. I'm glad to send them to you. Just email me at barbara@everestmarketingservices.com, and I'm glad to give you send that to you directly. Any other questions that we might have? I think we've got a few minutes. So shoot some, if you feel like it, shoot some arrows at what we've been talking about. Thinking about the strategy, what is it going to take to win, and how do we differentiate ourselves from the competition? Then how do we go a level deeper? Why us? Why not them? And so what? And then also the clarity and how can we lighten up, clean up, and clear up our heavy text. So here's a question. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Sometimes a graph or chart can say so much in a paragraph. Absolutely. That's that concept between people would rather look at something than read it. So a matrix, a diagram, a site plan. We can, you know, how can you use an infographic? That's why infographics are so popular, because we can take data and make it so that it's a little icon, it's a little image that goes along, and we can convey expertise. Award winning, you can put a little award, those kinds of things. So yeah, pictures. At the same time, we also know we have to answer all the questions. And so how can we combine text with imagery so that they weave together and give the reader or the viewer of the information the most information? There are going to be some readers who really will read every single word in a proposal, but not everybody does. So how do we understand that there are going to be some people who look at the pictures? There are going to be some people who read every word. There are going to be some people that are flipping through, so they may stop when they see something interesting. So how can we invite them in with good writing as well as a good overall look for it? So here's a comment. I'm faced with clients that need non-technical writing but want technical. Their audience isn't technical and they won't follow the level of technicality. So do we recommend trying to please the client and setting realistic explanations or trying to convince the client? I think what you have to realize is that it is persuasive. You want them to select you. You want them to come to your side of the opinion, to understand what it is exactly that you're saying. And I know for technical people, we have a belief that we've got to get into the weeds, and that isn't always necessarily the case. So I talk about having that plan. What are the key steps? Can you organize it into something that's easy for them to understand and then break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces so that it's more clear, realizing that one piece of paper, one proposal, one email could get read by lots of different people, and they're all going to bring in their frame of reference, their filters, their constraints, their problems, their time constraints, those kinds of things. So one piece of communication has to appeal to lots of different kinds of readers. And a lot of times those readers may not be the kind of people that you are. So you have to think about it in terms of what is their knowledge? How are they, are they visual people? And realizing that nobody wants to read a whole bunch of information. So one of the things that I think is really important is that when you're a really smart person, you have lots of big words and lots of complicated thoughts. And you have to communicate this with someone who isn't maybe as smart as you are. When you can simplify, when you can be very clear in what it is you're communicating, whether it's written or verbal, then the other person gets the information and they learn because of what you're sharing with them. your credibility skyrockets because you have the ability to synthesize information, figure out what is the most important, understand what's going on in your reader or your audience's mind, and you can give them the right amount of information that they'll appreciate, they'll respect, and it really does help you become even more credible and authoritative. So, the more complicated it is, the better it is, the better it isn't, or the better it isn't. And the simpler it is, it does not dumb down your knowledge. It makes it so that it's clear and that it's not a barrier to how you're communicating. So fundamentally, clarity wins. If you confuse, you lose. Simple words matter, and it doesn't indicate that you're not as smart as someone else. It just indicates that you're more concerned with them getting what the message is that you would like them to believe. So with that, I think I probably only have a minute or two left. Chuck, I'll turn it back over to you so you can finish up. Again, please reach out to me through email. We'll see if ACEC can also send out some of this information, but I'm glad to be able to continue the conversation and wish you the very best of luck. If you confuse, you lose. Clarity matters. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
I only have a few words. Wow, that was great. I think if someone doesn't walk away from this presentation with some information, they just weren't listening. ACEC will be able to make Barbara's information available. So check out, I invite you to reach out with Barbara. She is very engaging and very insightful, and she can help you out. With that, I'm going to say thank you, Barbara, for such a fantastic presentation. And let's hope all this happens in person next year. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you.